All right. All right, so this week we are going to go through consequences. I'm Beth Branham from Opportunities Inc., and then I also have Brett Gillio with me from Big Sky Therapeutic Services. Okay, so this is the last session and what we're currently doing. And so we've gotten all the way up to working on the skills in the executive state. So the state in which we're able to problem solve. And there is a reason that consequences are one of the last things that we talk about. And that is because we have to have built a relationship with our kids and worked through the other brain states to be able to get to the point where we can utilize consequences, in an appropriate way and also in a way that is actually going to work. Because we don't have a relationship built with our children, we're not going to be able to use consequences as a tool in a way that's going to be helpful for us or helpful for our kids. Okay, so the skill of consequence. So this is a tool to motivate someone to learn and use new skills, and many of the new skills that we've talked about up until this point. So learning from consequences requires two things. So their ability to reflect on choices, think about the choices that we have and learn from our experiences, and then being able to take ownership over our choices and having a motivation to want to change. And so, as you can see, we have to be able to be in our executive state or our problem solving state, because we're not going to be able to really think about our choices if we're in a survival state or in that flight or fight kind of thing. We're not going to be able to do these things. So that's why we have to be in that particular brain state to use consequences. Okay, so there's three different types of consequences that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about natural consequences, which is much like it sounds. And then we're going to talk about logical consequences, and then we're going to talk about problem solving. And the big thing with consequences is we want to use especially natural consequences now while our kids are younger, and the stakes are a little bit lower. And Brett's going to kind of go into this because if we work on it now, then it'll prevent, our kiddos from making, bigger mistakes maybe later that have really bad consequences, like getting in a car accident, for example, or something that's major. So if we can teach them now with small natural consequences in a safe environment, then that's going to be better as they grow up, learn new skills, and grow into adults. Okay, so there will be a link to a video on here where Becky Bailey is going to talk more in depth about logical consequences.
So as we talk about natural consequences, so one of the first consequences we're going to talk about is natural consequences motivate us to learn. It's the most powerful tool. And if we allow natural consequences to occur, as long as they're safe, physically and emotionally, people learn pretty quickly. I think about it, if we look at learning occurs naturally, think about touching a hot stove. So when you touch a hot stove, and most kids have touched a hot stove, we told them don't touch the hot stove. Parents might have taken away, so in the past people would smack their hand, but when a kid touches a hot stove, they learn really quickly to not do that again. And there's multiple examples of things like that where people learn really quickly. And obviously we don't want our kids to get hurt, but that's a good example. I think about crawling as a natural consequence, and consequences can be good or bad. And when kids learn to crawl, as they start to move their arms and their legs, they actually learn to move their body in a certain direction. So they actually learn. And then they start to get motivated by they're able to crawl to a toy, crawl to a parent, those kind of things. Talking, communication is a great natural consequence because once kids start to learn to communicate, they can get their needs met. You know, bottle, hungry, snack, mama, dada, up, those kind of things. And um, so natural consequences occur all the time around us, and they're extremely powerful. I think about when you're driving a car and let's say you weren't paying attention and you have a car accident. Well, you learn really quickly. You will remember that, and that's really, really important. That just natural consequences occur around us all the time. The good things, the not so good things. There is a video. I'm going to put a link in here um, about um, about this video about texting and walking, and it's just a good example how people text and walk, and there's been a huge increase in deaths, injuries, all sorts of things occurring, which is really important. And now this is obviously an example of not. It's not safe to let people learn to walk into traffic while they're on their phone because it can result in death. And so, but in this video, there's a couple examples of parents who were walking with their kids, took a wrong step, broke their ankles, and or on YouTube you can watch videos of people walking into holes or to posts or things like that. Now, sometimes people will learn, which is great, and other times they won't learn. And so natural consequences are very valuable if, as we talked about in the first couple of slides, if the individual learns from that experience and then can either change their behavior or repeat the behavior that helps them get what they need. We won't watch the video here. So let's talk about natural consequences that occur all the time. So like one natural consequence that all of us have encountered at some point in our life is not eating at dinner time. And so is it something, when we go through these, is it something is it safe? Is it legal? And can I live with it when we talk about natural consequences? So I grew up as like, you're going to sit at the table till you eat your dinner, or I will save it for you in the fridge till later on. And if you're hungry, you can eat it. Now, is that legal? Sure. Is it safe? Probably. But most parents don't have the opportunity to sit and wait and work that out. But it is a natural consequence. You're offering your kid food. It's safe to do that. And, we should never withhold food from kids, but, you can't force food down a kid's throat. So the natural consequence if you don't eat is you go hungry. But being able to make sure that they have food handy, maybe it's what's for dinner, you pull it back out of the fridge, you put it in the microwave, that works. What's the natural consequence of refusing to share with others? So, typically, I'm sure we all have people in our lives where we have shared things with them and they've not reciprocated that. And so the consequence for us is like we just kind of don't share it with those people anymore. Or we learn to not share with people. Think about children as they are learning to share toys or not share toys, about how if a kid doesn't give the toy back within a reasonable amount of time, a kid might hit another kid. Now, is that safe? No. So we definitely teach some skills around that. But sometimes if you don't share with somebody, or excuse me, if a child isn't sharing with somebody, they lose friends. And that's a natural consequence. But it only works if they understand the consequence, if they can make a meaningful change related to that. How about running across the street? So, trying to teach your kids not to run in the street. A natural consequence of that, you might get hit by a car. Is that safe? No. Is it legal? Well, I mean, if you're not watching your kid, it could be illegal. And if your kid got hit and died, could you live with it? So that is a natural consequence that we don't want to allow to happen. So we have to teach some specific skills around that. Think about kids when they throw a toy and it breaks. that's a natural consequence, because if you throw something and it breaks, you might not do that again. How many people have broken a cell phone because they didn't have a case on it? And they're like, I should have put that case on it. Hopefully next time they will put a case on their phone or a protector of some kind to prevent that. And after you break enough phones, hopefully you'll change your behavior. Think about natural consequences of kids running away from their parents in a store. Um, with that can be a little interesting, because if your kid runs away from the parents in the store, you don't want something to happen to them, for them to get lost, for someone to take them. But typically, it happens for kids when they run away from their parents in the store, is that they may become scared because all of a sudden they cannot find their parent. And while I don't want that to happen to kids, for them to be scared, but it is a natural consequence to be like, hey, that's why you need to stay near me. When you run away, I don't know where you are. You might get scared. You might get lost. It's important to stay with me. It's a natural consequence that sometimes you can allow to happen, um, especially if you have an eye on them. You're able to see where they're going, those kind of things. But typically, running away from parents in the store is not a safe, natural consequence. Um, I think about not picking up toys that are on the floor and you step on them. Most parents have stepped on a Lego, they've stepped on a toy. Um, and if kids step on a toy that's been on the floor, and it hurts their foot, that's a natural consequence. The question is, will they learn from that and pick up their toys? Well, I don't expect a 2-year-old to pick up their toys and put them away after they're done playing with them. I don't expect a 3-year-old to quite do that, but with some guidance, they will. A 1-year-old won't do that. Like, they don't have that concept yet. But if a child's in the living room, they're 3 or 4 or 5, and they're playing and they step on one of their toys and it gets broken, or the dog steps on a toy and they yell at the dog, like, don't step on my toys, it's a great opportunity to teach natural consequences about when you don't pick up your toys, they might get broken. And we think about logical consequences. Those are consequences that are imposed on someone by someone else. So if you think about the police, you see a police car, it's usually in relationship to you've been speeding, you get a ticket. Um, Maybe you did something in school, you go to the principal's office. Um, or where a parent sits down and talks to you and says, hey, this is what you did. Here's the consequence. You're going to have to do a timeout. You can't have your friend over. I'm not going to let you play with this anymore. Those kind of things. So logical consequences are those where someone else imposes it on us. And if natural consequences don't work, you can create logical consequences that help teach kids the link between our behaviors and what happens and occurs. So, if you don't arrive to work on time, you might lose your job. If you don't pay your rent, you might lose your house. If you don't pay your car payment, if you don't put gas in your car, those kinds of things. Um, Logical consequences, you use those when um, children know how to display a desired behavior and you feel connected with them. So it'd be illogical or unreasonable for me to ask a child, 3-year-old, to make their bed if they don't know how to make their bed, or if they're not tall enough to make their bed. Um, or um, maybe I'm working with a child that really does not know how to share. And I'm like, well, now you can't play with your friends. Well, if they don't know how to share, don't know how to take turns, or don't even know how to use their words to get help or to manage their feelings, then logical consequences don't work very well, because they can't, it's very, very difficult to change your behavior. Um, and you can use logical consequences when children can successfully display a given target or a given behavior for a reasonable amount of time. Um, and what I mean by that is, it's kind of like, I often hear it where somebody will tell me, well, I know the kid can do it because I saw them do it. And great. We can see somebody do it, but many of us, it takes multiple training opportunities, multiple times of displaying a specific skill before it becomes successful for us often enough that that's the behavior we're going to display. So, um, and we'll get into this just a little bit more here as we talk about we're going to talk about walking and that. So, what's really important about this is children that do not have the skills or the ability to display a behavior consistently, they'll fail often, give up, and stop trying. And that, we want children to persevere and to work through that and be resilient to solve problems. And if a kid fails too much, gives up and stops trying, we end up taking care of them and they don't learn to be independent, which is really important. This is just a good example. I think about when we're connected with our kids, when we talk about conscious discipline and being connected and all the things that we've talked about so far, is that when we are connected with people, our emotional piggy bank is full, or it has more positives than it has negatives in it. I think about it as um, like a bank account. So if your bank account is in the red often, it doesn't feel good. An emotional piggy bank is the same thing. If we, as parents or professionals, are yelling at our kids, we're telling them, no, don't stop, quit or not, we're correcting them a lot, um, then kids will feel like I just can't do anything right. And so it's so important to deposit positives, is to have good connected time with them, play games, engage with them in activities that they're successful at, laugh, play, hug, hold, because the more connected we are, the more likely somebody is willing to work with us to display the kind of behaviors that we need them to display. I think about if somebody down the street asks you, can I borrow your car? You're going to be like, no, I have no clue who you are. But if you had a very good friend that you're well connected with and you have a good relationship with and a friendship with, and they said, hey, can I borrow your car? You're like, sure, because you have that connection with them, and which is really important. So logical consequences have some requirements in order to help them be successful. So, or to help them work. One is we have to clearly and assertively set up a natural logical consequence ahead of time. So an example would be is the next time you throw your toy, I'm going to put your toy in timeout. The next time that you choose not to eat dinner at the dinner table, then I'll save your dinner for you. When you're hungry, we'll pull it out and you can definitely eat dinner at the dinner table. So we have to set it up ahead of time so that kids know what the consequence is. So if you speed and you know what the speed limit is on the sign is, you know what the consequences. You don't, when the police pull you over or police is behind you, you know that they didn't pull you over just because. You pretty much know what they're going to do when they get up to the window and be like, hey, do you know why I pulled you over? Well, yeah, I was speeding. Okay, right. So it's important to have the children repeat what will happen, what the consequence is going to be, so that we understand or know that they understand what will occur. When the child blows it, which they will test the boundary for this or they'll forget, then you have to deliver the logical consequence. And logical consequences must be related to the behavior that are related to a behavior that you're trying to change or shift. The consequences need to be respectful in how we deliver it. So we want to use a polite, nice tone of voice. And kids might not be mean and say you're the worst parent in the world. And I think we just have to model that appropriate behavior. They need to be reasonable, and it needs to be reasonable within their ability and make sense. So, that timeouts, people often say 1 minute per age. I'm not going to give a 2-year-old a week-long consequence. That just is not reasonable, and it doesn't help shift behavior. And then we also need to use empathy with kids, and just understanding like, I know this is sad, this is hard, this is not what you wanted to have happen. Um, so because it is hard for kids, like they don't want the consequence to happen, and most of us don't want the consequence to happen. So here's some examples of um, let's talk a little bit about logical consequences. And so one thing that's really important, I think I've talked about earlier, is when you come up with a logical consequence, you have to be able to live with it. Um, and I think about how many of us were in the car with our parents, and our parents said, "If you don't stop arguing, I'm going to turn this car around." Very few people that I've ever talked with have their parents actually turn the car around. There's been a few, but very few. And so if I say that, it's like, you're not going to turn the car around. I mean, my dad never did. Or my dad would be like, yeah, if you guys don't stop, I'm going to smack you. Well, we would just sit in the farthest seat in the car, crawl in the back of the station wagon so he couldn't get us. And so, like, we have to we have to be able to live with it. It has to be reasonable. So let's say, let's say a child is hitting another sibling or hit another sibling or hitting a parent. A logical consequence could be is the next time you hit, you're going to go to timeout in a timeout chair, and you're going to go to timeout for 5 minutes or whatever that might be. Or if you hit your brother again, you might, you're going to lose TV for the rest of the night. You might have to go to bed early. Um, and of course, by the time we get to this point, we're trying all our other skills to teach kids how to use their words. Because if a sibling's hitting another sibling because they took a toy, we're going to teach with that. Um, we're going to teach skills that we need to replace those other skills with, because not everything needs a logical consequence. So how about running from parents inside a store? So a logical consequence is the next time you run, you have to sit in the cart. Or the next time you run, you got to put your hand on the cart. Or the next time you run, we're going to um, go out to the car and we'll sit in the car quietly for 5 minutes. Um, there's a few times that I've had parents that in stores where we've worked hard on getting the parent to leave the store if the kid is throwing too big of a fit, especially if their cart is full. And I tell them, just go tell the clerk, say, hey, my son's having a meltdown or a fit. I need to take him outside the store. I'm going to come back and get my cart, or I'm sorry, I can't come back and get my cart. I really apologize. And you leave. Because once kids learn that you mean business, that the consequence is going to occur, then that's really important. What happens if a kid doesn't pick up their toys? The natural consequence would be is I might pick up their toys and then you can have them back next weekend, right? And that would depend if the kid's probably 8 or 9 or 10. If the kid's 5, 6, or 7, I might be like, well, tomorrow you can ask me for the toys. If the kid is 1 or 2, I'm not going to give a natural logical consequence for that because that's unreasonable. If they're 3 and they're not helping me pick up the toys, I might sit them on the couch and say, let me know when you're ready to help me pick up the toys, but we're not watching TV until you do. How about stealing candy from a store? Many parents will march their kid right back into the store, confess to that, and maybe even pay for the candy. In a couple cases, I've had parents who have where the kids have started to eat the candy and they made the kids spit it out. They go back in, they pay for the candy, and then they throw the candy away because um, that's a logical consequence. Like, why should the kid get it? They took something from it. So, how about a logical consequence of not getting schoolwork done in class? Well, then you have homework. Um, and then a logical consequence of not doing homework is you might get failing grades. Can you, as a parent, live with that? And that is the big question. But a logical consequence for not getting your homework done is removing your phone, removing access to the phone, not allowing electronics, not allowing video games, those kinds of things. And so for a kid that's 5 or 6, if they're not doing their homework, I might be like, let's do 1 or 2 assignments, and then he can watch TV for 10 minutes. Let's do 1 or 2 assignments, then he can watch TV for 10 minutes. For a teenager, they have more ability to manage themselves and their emotions. Can be like, Well, when your homework's done, you can have your electronics back. Um, that's just an example. We have to be able to live with that. Um, Lots of parents will ground their kids forever, which is not reasonable. Lots of parents will take away electronics forever, or for a week, or for a month, and that can be disastrous because then the kid is annoying the parent. They're like, "Yeah, I can't live with that. That's not reasonable." Um, and then, one last piece about um, logical consequences, you have to be able to follow through because, I think about all of us and driving and speeding is that um, if you got a ticket 100% of the time that you drove over the speed limit, you would no longer speed. Since you don't get a ticket every time that you go over the speed limit, you are more likely to sometimes go above the speed limit just enough that you don't get in trouble. Um, and so you kind of skirt the limits of the consequence just by managing your behavior, by realizing that the consequence doesn't happen 100% of the time, those kinds of things. And we as parents, we can't manage the consequences 100% of the time. But when you're dealing with a difficult behavior, it's really important to follow through, especially like with hitting, kicking, destruction, those kind of things. It's really important to follow through with intervention. So the last type of consequence is problem solving. So, and this is where we work with kids um, and we realize that they're missing a skill. That's something that we need to help them do or help teach them um, so they can solve this problem on their own. And so it kind of sounds silly that it's a consequence, um, but we might teach. Um, like I'm trying to think of a couple examples. Um, like maybe a kid is looking ahead here on the screen, but I have a couple examples as we move forward. But problem solving might be is maybe a kid is um, they have a cup as they're learning to drink out of a cup and it spills all over the place. Well, most parents get a sippy cup or something with a special lid on it because that helps teach the skill. But eventually, you have to give kids a real cup and they will spill the milk. They will spill the food. And so we have to teach them directly how to hold it, how to hold the cup, how to problem solve. And you might be like, oh, see, if you tip it back too quick, look, it spills out fast all over your face. Um, if you don't hold your cup up, or if you don't hold your cup with two hands, it gets spilled. Or teaching kids to put their cup above the plate on the table, because how many times do cups get tipped over on the table? And kids don't put it down low so it spills just because they want to create problems. Is they just don't know. They don't have the thought process to look ahead to determine what is going to happen. And so we teach that throughout the process. And so at the very bottom of the slide talks about you're saying, oops, you're still wonderful. Let's learn. It's okay. We're going to move forward. We're going to learn. So problem solving, this is there's kind of steps to do this, and it requires one, you need to be calm, alert, and everybody needs to be in their executive state, which is a state that they're ready to learn and teach. So remember stars, uh, man, I'm trying to remember. Stop. Maybe Beth will remember that. She's done mute herself though. Oh, smile, take a deep breath, and relax. Sorry, I always take a deep breath myself. But the reason why you smile is it definitely helps us kind of look at things a little different, and we want to take a deep breath and relax and realize that kids are displaying behaviors because they don't have the skill set to manage. Um, then we'll say, I don't like it when you run away from me in the store. Next time you run away from me, you're going to sit in the cart for the rest of the trip. Then you're going to check for understanding, willingness. Are you willing to do that? Let's practice now. And then you'll practice with a kid staying with you walking and be like, hey, let's walk 5 feet. I want to see you stay next to me. Look at it. You did it. You stayed next to me this whole time. And then at the end, you're going to connect. You might do a high five, a handshake, make a positive comment. And we got a couple more examples of problem solving skills here. Sharing. So kids have to learn how to share. Some don't. Some adults don't know how to share. But when kids are not sharing, we need to stop, take a deep breath, and say, you know, I don't like it when you take that toy away from Johnny. Next time, ask Johnny, can I please play with that toy? And then you're going to check for understanding. Are you willing to do that? Let's practice now. And then you'll have the kid say, Johnny, can I play with that toy? Let's say that Johnny says, no, I don't. I'm playing with it right now. Then we might help them by saying, hey, how about in 5 minutes? Will that work? Great. So we're going to teach the kid how to ask for what he needs. Let's say a kid is playing with a toy and won't let anybody else play with it. I don't like it when you, so to walk through the steps, we'll say, I don't like it when you keep that toy the whole entire time. Next time, I would like you to share with your friends. Then you can, are you willing to do that? Let's practice now. How about in 5 minutes or 1 minute, you can share this with your friends. And then look at it, you did it, great. That way we're practicing the sharing. Let's say that a kid comes, so I'm going to the third and pushing someone away from a toy. So if a kid's playing on the floor with some toys and a kid comes and sits next to him and he starts pushing him away, like, get away, I don't like you. We might say, you know, I don't like it when you push my friend and tell him to get away. Next time, say, Johnny, can you please let me play by myself for 5 more minutes? And of course, this all depends on the age level of the kid. I'm not going to expect this of a 3-year-old. But I might expect a 3-year-old to say, I want to play by myself. And then I would ask the kid, are you willing? So I'd ask it, are you willing to do that? Are you willing to use your words? Let's practice now, and have the kid practice and then say, look at it, you did it. And then encourage that positive behavior. I did talk a little bit about taking a toy. That happens often. So I might teach kids by saying, I don't like it when you take a toy from my friend. Next time, if you want to play with a toy, ask them, can I play with the truck? And that's, this takes a little bit of practice because in the moment, it's very hard to do. And sometimes after a few moments, I'll write down these sequences of events and practice. We won't be able to watch this video, but I am going to post it next to this. And I ask people, like, how long does it take for somebody to learn a new skill and be proficient? And let's just take kids, like stages of walking. How long does it take a baby, an infant, to learn to walk and be successful at it? And the answer is somewhere between 7 and 13 months. And it takes a lot of patience. And one interesting, when you watch this video, they talk a lot about, I think this is the video, there's a couple other ones I watched where there's like, kids will fall and bonk their heads, hit their toes hundreds of times, multiple times per day, hundreds of times per day and week, and over months before they learn to become so proficient at running or walking that they rarely fall. And I think about for us as parents, or even for our children, is when they're learning a new skill, if they can just display it once, does not mean that they can display it successfully all the time. So it takes a lot of patience to realize that it takes time to learn new skills. We have to be patient with ourselves as parents, and we have to be patient with our children as they learn these new skills. Kids will spill milk. They will spill milk on the carpet. They will spill milk on the table. Kids will be nice and try and bring you your coffee, and then they're going to spill the coffee. All sorts of things happen. And so that's just a normal experience. So this is Beth's.
Okay, so this kind of goes through what Brett was talking about with logical consequences. So just this is a handout that we would give out in class, but we're doing it online this time. So the three big R's are it has to be related to their behavior. It can't be something that's just, doesn't make any sense and doesn't match up. It has to be respectful in how we deliver it. Um, Kids deserve just as much respect as we would like to have as adults. So we need to make sure we're being respectful and then also reasonable. Um, and Brett talked about this. It has to be something that the child can actually do and something that makes sense to them. And then one of the biggest things that is has been from week to week is that we have to have that empathy. So when kids blow it, they make mistakes, we're trying to follow through with a consequence. We have to make sure that we do that with empathy. And then explain and ask for understanding. And then something else that I just kind of wanted to talk about too a little bit is that sometimes we might not know what a good consequence is. As parents, sometimes kids can catch you off guard, and then it's sometimes hard to come up right away with a consequence, and it's okay to delay that because some of the times if we're trying to provide an immediate consequence, we can accidentally leave that empathy out because we're angry. Or we can become really reactive, which is why, as we've talked about from the beginning and all the way through, we have to be able to be as adults in that problem solving state. So if you find that you're not, it is okay to say, I'm going to have to think about this, that kind of thing. So I also just wanted to kind of mention that. And then another thing is, say there's a particular time that's kind of always difficult. Like maybe it's going to the store. Um, it might help if there's a time like that to make a plan ahead of time um, of what you're going to do and kind of try that out. So whether it's like what Brett was talking about, maybe, if my child is exhibiting this behavior, I'm going to leave the cart and go outside and come back, or I'm going to leave the cart entirely and go home. Sometimes it can help to have a plan ahead of time, and we're able to, I feel, be a little bit more empathetic if we're not trying to react. So those are just a couple of thoughts that I kind of had too around consequences that can be helpful. And again, it goes off of age too. Obviously consequences for 2-year-olds look way different than consequences do for like a 5-year-old. So you also have to be kind of aware of that, and that's where that keeping things reasonable really comes into play, because like he's talking about, a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old have way different skills and knowledge, so you have to tailor it to their age too. But yeah, that's all that I had.
Great.